today about the Dewey Decimal System and using the DDC, whatever volumes that you have. Hopefully most of you have the unabridged. This also works with the abridged, but I will be using the unabridged, which is 4 volumes. The first volume has the tables in it. Second volume, which is this one here, has the index, and then volumes 3 and 4 are the specific Dewey numbers. Now, a couple of things that will make your life easier as you use these books. First of all, if you have a subject that you're looking up, you want to look it up in the index volume. And in most cases, it will give you a suggested Dewey Decimal number. In some cases, it will give you more than one, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky, and I'll try and give you some examples on how best to choose which one to use for your library. One helpful tip is to realize that there are 10 major divisions. You all probably know that. The 10 major divisions are given in the beginning of volume 3, and it will give you the subdivisions. So if you start out in the 100s, you have 110, 120, and so on. Then within volume 3 and volume 4, you will get, after each of the subdivisions, such as 530, 540, 550, 970, it will give you the next divisions, in this case 971, 972. So as you go through the volumes, it will give you these chunks of the system that are in that specific part of the volume. Now, if you go to the index, let's use the example of alcoholism. This is where consistency is the most important thing. If you look up alcoholism, you'll see the call number 362.292 in the index. There's also one for 616.861. The 300s are social sciences. The 600s have more to do with medicine. My suggestion is to pick one or the other and put all your books on alcoholism in one or the other, regardless of whether the emphasis is on medicine or the emphasis is on the sociological. So that way, I think most students or patrons could find the books together. The key thing I always would tell my students is the Dewey Decimal groups books by subject. And if they have that concept, they can look up a Dewey Decimal, or they can look up a subject, find the Dewey Decimal number, and then browse those books on the shelf. And I found that in browsing, it's helpful to have all those books together rather than in 2 separate areas, because that tends to be the way most people will look. They're not going to sit down at the library catalog and write down every call number. So in that, for me, it was a lot easier to put them in one or the other and then let the students browse, which tends to be the way people do it anyway. Another example would be abortion. 300s, again, are medicine. So if you have a lot of teen pregnancy questions, that sort of thing, I would tend to go with the 300s. If you were in a school that emphasized more the medical aspects of pregnancy, you might put those books in the 600s. Subjects such as animals, which basically is 598, 599. If you have a small collection, you might put all your books on mammals in 599. But if you have a large collection, 599 is broken down into all different kinds of mammals, and then you would add the specific numbers that come after the decimal. Same thing in sports, 796. If you only had 20 books on sports, you might leave them all in 796. Most libraries, though, would tend to want to break them down by sport, which for 796, you might have 796.332 for your subjects such as football, or 796.357 for baseball. So it depends upon the size of your library, but in most cases, you want to use the more specific for the sport. Now let's talk a little bit about the 800s. 800s are literature, and there's some specific things that are a little bit different than using other categories. So let me just mention a couple of highlights here. First of all, it's important to know what the nationality is of your author. The 810s, 811, 812, those are for American. The 820s are for English, and then 830s, 840s, other nationalities. So that's where you start. Most of your books are going to be American, so let's take a look at that. 811. 811 is for books of poetry. If you have a book that's a poetry of one specific author, it would be 811. If you have a collection of American poets, it would be 811.08. Same thing with drama. If you have a play or a collection of plays by one specific author, it would be 812. If it's a variety of authors or playwrights, 812.08. In the 800s, those are the main numbers that you use. 813, that's for fiction. We usually have separate fiction sections, so you're not going to use that. And most of the other categories, you're not going to use. It's usually the 1s and the 2s that you use. And then if we go to English literature, we use the example of plays. 822 would be plays by individual author. 822.08 would be a collection of plays by a variety of playwrights who are English. And then specifically 822.33 is reserved for William Shakespeare because of how many different plays he has. And look at your DDC to see more specifically how they break down those individual plays. But these are the main categories that you need to be concerned with in the 800s. Most of the other categories are not going to come into effect in most libraries. Now a few words on the 900s, which is basically history and also geography. For most libraries, school libraries, the collections are not so extensive that you need to go into a lot of detail. For example, 940.54 is the history of World War II. For most school libraries, that may be all the subdivision that you need or the only Dewey Decimal that you need. If you have a large collection, let's say you have a lot of reports on World War II, you have 100 books, you might want to break it down. For example, you might have specific books that dealt with the Holocaust because you do units on Anne Frank. So then you would have 940.5381, and that would separate the Holocaust books from just the general books on World War II. Or if you do a lot of reports, let's say, on battles. One of the battles was Pearl Harbor, so that might be .5426. You would put all those Pearl Harbor books together that way. So that's one way that you can use the subdivisions to group books, or if you have a smaller collection, just leave them in the broader Dewey number. Another example is 973. 973 is the history of the United States. General books that cover the whole history of the United States would go in 973. And then it's further subdivided, like 970.3 is books on the Revolution. 973.7 is books on the Civil War. Again, there are quite a few subdivisions under that, but unless you have a real large collection on Civil War, you'll probably just put all your books in 973.7. When you get to the 20th century, that's 973.9. You may have all your books on the 20th century in that. But if you do have a large collection, then you can break it down further. And the way the Dewey Decimal does that is by administration. So for example, .921 is the Eisenhower administration, which is basically the 50s. So that is how you can use your Dewey Decimal numbers to best classify your books depending upon the size of your collection using the 900s.